What happens when the President of the United States threatens to block a $6.5 billion bridge, only to be told he can't? In early 2026, Donald Trump seemed to think he could strong-arm America's closest ally over the brand-new, state-of-the-art Gordie Howe International Bridge. He jumped on social media, unleashed a shocking public threat, and claimed America was being taken for a ride on a project it got nothing from. He demanded compensation. He demanded respect. He demanded to own half of it. But he never counted on one man picking up the phone to patiently and very publicly set him straight. This is the story of a presidential threat that backfired, a phone call that stunned the White House, and a secretive billionaire family that had been pulling strings behind the scenes for decades. This isn't just about a bridge. It's about the collision of facts and fiction, the quiet power of diplomacy, and the hidden schemes that shape our world. And it all started with a single explosive post on Truth Social. On February 9, 2026, Donald Trump did what he does best: create chaos with a few hundred characters online. In a sprawling post, he declared war on a piece of concrete and steel. He wrote that Canada had been treating the United States very unfairly for decades. Then he turned his sights on the nearly completed Gordie Howe International Bridge, a massive new span connecting Detroit, Michigan, and Windsor, Ontario. His claims were breathtaking. First, he alleged the bridge was built with virtually no U.S. content. Second, he claimed Canada just expected him, as president, to let them take advantage of America, and that the U.S. was getting absolutely nothing from the deal. His solution was simple and direct. "I will not allow this bridge to open until the United States is fully compensated for everything we have given," he declared, adding that America should own at least one half of this asset. To top it off, he announced that negotiations with Canada would begin immediately. To the casual observer, it looked like a classic Trump move, a powerful leader standing up for his country against a freeloader neighbor. The post was littered with other grievances about Canadian dairy tariffs and liquor sales, painting a picture of a nation taking advantage of American generosity. It was a story designed to inflame, to project strength, and to rally his base. The immediate reaction was a mix of shock, confusion, and, for some, applause. But for anyone who'd actually been following the project, the post was completely baffling. Because not only had Donald Trump supported this very bridge during his first term, he had personally championed it. In 2017, he stood with Canadian officials and praised the project. In 2019, he signed a spending bill that allocated the first $15 million in U.S. funding for the bridge's inspection plazas. His own ambassador had lifted a ceremonial shovel at the groundbreaking. So what changed? Why was a bridge he once championed now the target of his fury? This wasn't just a change of heart. It was a complete 180 on his own administration's policy. It sent shockwaves through communities on both sides of the border. In Windsor, a city already battered by trade disputes, people worried about what came next. Michigan lawmakers, both Democrats and Republicans who had worked for years to make the bridge a reality, were stunned. Former Republican Governor Rick Snyder, a key architect of the bridge deal, called Trump's threat awful for our state's economy and said the president must have gotten some bad advice. But this wasn't just bad advice. This was an information processing failure at the highest level. Trump's post wasn't just misleading. Nearly every core claim he made was flat-out false. He was threatening to block a bridge based on facts that just weren't true. And in doing so, he had stumbled into a decades-long war, exposing a hidden power struggle over North America's single most important trade artery. He thought he was picking a fight with Canada. He was about to find out he was a pawn in someone else's game. To understand just how wrong he was, you first have to understand the bridge itself. The Gordie Howe International Bridge isn't just another bridge. It is the largest and most ambitious binational infrastructure project on the entire Canada-US border. It's a titan of engineering, a 6-lane, cable-stayed marvel stretching over 1.5 miles of the Detroit River. But its importance isn't just symbolic, it's economic. The Windsor-Detroit corridor is the beating heart of North American trade. It's the busiest commercial land crossing on the continent, with a staggering 25% of all trade between the U.S. and Canada, more than $130 billion in goods last year, crossing right here. The auto industry, with its deeply integrated supply chains, depends on this link for its very survival. For decades, this vital artery has had a huge vulnerability. It relies almost entirely on a single, aging bridge. The Ambassador Bridge, which opened way back in 1929, has been the workhorse of this corridor. But it's old, it's congested, and it forces tens of thousands of trucks every day to crawl through local city streets just to get to it, creating bottlenecks that ripple through the economy. For years, officials knew they had a problem. Relying on one privately owned bridge for a quarter of their trade was a massive risk. Study after study came to the same conclusion. The Ambassador Bridge alone couldn't handle future demand. A new, modern, publicly owned bridge wasn't a luxury, it was a flat-out necessity. After years of negotiations and political battles, the Gordie Howe International Bridge was born. It was designed to solve every problem the old bridge created. It features direct highway-to-highway connections, getting rid of those time-wasting city traffic lights. It has massive, state-of-the-art customs plazas designed to move people and goods efficiently. It provides redundancy, making sure that if one bridge has a problem, the entire North American economy doesn't grind to a halt. But here's the crucial point, the fundamental fact that Donald Trump either didn't know or chose to ignore. This is the fact that dismantles his entire argument. Who paid for this magnificent $6.4 billion Canadian dollar project? Canada did. Not a joint fund? Not a 50-50 split. Canada. The Canadian federal government is funding the entire project. They're paying for the bridge itself, the massive Canadian Customs Plaza, the land acquisition in Michigan, and even the on-ramps connecting the bridge to Interstate 75 in Detroit. You might be wondering, why would Canada pay for a bridge in America? The answer is simple: to get it built. For years, the project was stalled by political fights in Michigan. So, in a 2012 deal, Canada made a stunning offer. We will finance the whole thing, including the American parts, to get this vital project moving. It was a strategic investment in their own economic future. The plan was, and still is, for Canada to get its money back over decades from tolls collected on the Canadian side. Once Canada's investment is repaid, the future toll revenue gets split with the state of Michigan. So when Trump demanded the U.S. be fully compensated, he was asking for payment on something the U.S. never paid for. When he demanded the U.S. should own at least one half of this asset, he was demanding something the U.S. was already getting for free. The deal already said the bridge would be publicly and jointly owned by Canada and the state of Michigan. And what about his claim of virtually no U.S. content? This was maybe the most easily disprovable lie of all. The 2012 agreement specifically allowed for both American and Canadian iron and steel. The U.S. half of the bridge was built with U.S. steel, and the project employed thousands of American workers, supporting over 12,000 jobs in Michigan alone. Trump's entire tirade was built on a foundation of lies. He was railing against a deal that was, by any objective measure, incredibly favorable to the United States. America was getting a brand new, multi-billion-dollar piece of infrastructure, critical to its own economy, without paying for the construction, and it would still co-own it and get a share of the profits. The question, then, isn't if the president was wrong. The question is why. Why launch such a fact-free attack on a key ally over a project that was a clear win for his own country? The answer isn't in Ottawa or Washington. It's in a corporate boardroom in Detroit, with a family that had spent half a century fighting to stop this exact bridge from ever being built. To understand why Donald Trump suddenly declared war on the Gordie Howe Bridge, you have to understand the man who for decades was known as the King of the Bridge, Manuel "Matty" Maroon. This is a story of monopoly, power, and the incredible influence one determined billionaire can have on a government. The Ambassador Bridge opened in 1929 as a private enterprise. For 50 years, it was controlled by one family, but in 1979, everything changed. The bridge was sold to a local trucking magnate named Matty Maroun. Maroun wasn't just buying a bridge, he was buying a choke point. He understood that controlling the Ambassador Bridge meant controlling the flow of billions of dollars in trade. He basically owned a money printing machine that generated over $60 million a year in tolls. And like any good monopolist, he was absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting his prize. For decades, as the Ambassador Bridge aged and traffic soared, calls for a new, public bridge grew louder. And for decades, Matty Maroun and his family fought back with everything they had. They poured millions into lobbying. They filed a dizzying number of lawsuits to block any competition. They ran aggressive ad campaigns. They were determined to stop the Gordie Howe Bridge or any public alternative at all costs. This wasn't just business, it was a crusade. The Maroun family's opposition was the single biggest obstacle to building a new crossing, delaying the project for years. But eventually, the combined will of the Canadian government and the state of Michigan, through that 2012 agreement, finally broke the stalemate. Construction on the Gordie Howe Bridge began in 2018. It seemed the Maroun family had finally lost, but they hadn't given up. Matty Maroun passed away in 2020, but his son, Matthew Maroun, inherited the bridge and the family's relentless fighting spirit. And in Donald Trump, he found a powerful, and perhaps unwitting, new ally. The Maroun family were major Republican donors, and they had been lobbying the Trump administration for years. Now, let's rewind to February 9, 2026. Trump unleashes his bombshell post, echoing claims about the bridge that were factually wrong but sounded suspiciously familiar to anyone who'd followed the Maroun family's long-running PR campaign. A coincidence? The New York Times didn't think so. Citing sources, the Times reported a stunning detail. Just hours before Trump's post went live, Matthew Maroun, the owner of the Ambassador Bridge, had a meeting in Washington with the U.S. Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick. Following that meeting, Lutnick himself spoke with President Trump by phone. The timeline was damning. A billionaire with a massive financial interest in stopping a public project meets with a cabinet secretary, that secretary calls the president, and hours later, the president publicly threatens to kill that very project, using talking points that sound like they were ripped from the billionaire's playbook. This is what Washington insiders call pay to play. It looked for all the world like a wealthy donor was cashing in his chips to have the President of the United States protect his private monopoly at the public's expense. The revelation sparked immediate outrage and an official investigation. Representative Robert Garcia, the top Democrat on the powerful House Oversight Committee, announced a probe into the administration's links to Maroun, demanding all communication records between the Commerce Secretary, the Maroun family, and the White House. In a scathing letter, Garcia wrote, "It appears that you have chosen to protect a politically connected billionaire donor family at the expense of promoting American commerce." He called the situation undeniably corrupt. Representative Rashida Tlaib of Michigan was even more blunt, stating, "Billionaire corruption goes hand in hand with the White House right now." The scheme was now out in the open. Trump's seemingly random outburst wasn't random at all. He had been activated, a powerful weapon in a private war over a public bridge. His threat wasn't about protecting American interests. It was about protecting a billionaire's monopoly. And while the White House was reeling, a call was being placed from Ottawa. The Canadians were about to respond. And they weren't sending just a diplomat. They were sending a heavyweight. As the political firestorm erupted in Washington, the Canadian government faced a critical choice. How do you respond when the leader of your closest ally makes a public threat based on disinformation, seemingly for a private interest? An angry rebuttal could spark a messy trade war. But doing nothing would be a sign of weakness. Canada chose a third option: be calm, be deliberate, and be armed with the facts. And the man they chose to deliver the message was Prime Minister Mark Carney. For those who don't know the name, Mark Carney is a figure who commands immense respect in international finance. He had been governor of the Bank of Canada, but more than that, he'd also served as governor of the Bank of England, one of the only non-Britons to ever hold that job. He is a financial heavyweight, a man used to navigating global economic crises. In short, he's the last person you want to debate dollars and cents with if you haven't done your homework. So, Prime Minister Carney picked up the phone and called President Trump directly. We may never know the exact words, but Carney gave a detailed public account of the conversation afterward. There was no shouting, no threats. Instead, he described a methodical, almost clinical, dismantling of Trump's entire argument. It was a masterclass in diplomacy and a brutal fact-check delivered right to the Oval Office. Carney calmly explained the reality of the situation. He told reporters that he explained Canada was footing the entire bill for the project, a project worth around 6 billion Canadian dollars. Point by point, he rebutted Trump's claims. He reminded the president that both Canadian and American steel and workers were used. He patiently clarified the ownership structure, stating for the record that ownership is, in fact, shared between the state of Michigan and the government of Canada. Every pillar of Trump's aggressive post was knocked down, not with anger, but with cold, hard facts from the agreement itself. When reporters asked what could have possibly motivated Trump's attack, Carney's response was a piece of sublime political judo. He didn't speculate about the Moran meeting or accuse Trump of corruption. He simply feigned polite confusion. "I don't know what motivated the statement yesterday," he said. "Both countries have been working on building this bridge for more than 20 years. It was a subtle but devastating line. By highlighting 2 decades of cooperation, he framed Trump's outburst as a bizarre, illogical break from the norm. He made the president look isolated and uninformed, without ever using those words. Carney then pivoted, reframing the bridge not as a fight, but as a partnership. "This is a great example of cooperation between our countries," he said, adding that what really matters is the commerce, tourism, and everyday travel that will soon move across the span. He took Trump's weapon and turned it into a talking point for international friendship. It was an incredibly shrewd strategy. Carney's calm, fact-based response let him seize control of the narrative, positioning Canada as the reasonable adult in the room. But he was also playing a longer game. By not escalating things with Trump, he let the American system work. He knew the House Oversight Committee was launching its investigation. His restraint gave U.S. lawmakers the political space they needed to scrutinize the president's actions without looking like they were siding with a foreign power against their own leader. It was a stunning moment. A world leader, voice to voice with the notoriously thin-skinned President of the United States, effectively told him, "Mr. President, you are wrong, and here are the facts." And he did it so professionally that it left the White House scrambling. Trump's team tried to spin the call, suggesting the president still believed the U.S. should have shared authority and economic benefits. Benefits Carney had just publicly confirmed were already in the deal. The fact check had landed, and it hit its mark. The immediate aftermath was a flurry of political activity. Donald Trump's threat, meant to project strength, had backfired spectacularly. Instead of bringing Canada to its knees, it united bipartisan voices in Michigan against the White House. Republican former Governor Rick Snyder, who helped craft the original deal, publicly praised the bridge as a great deal for America. Democratic Senator Alyssa Slotkin of Michigan called Trump's threat awful for our state's economy, warning it would lead to higher costs and fewer jobs. In Windsor, Mayor Drew Dilkins labeled the president's claims nonsensical and said Trump clearly was commenting without fact. The very people Trump was supposedly fighting for were the ones most loudly opposing him. Meanwhile, the investigation on Capitol Hill was gaining steam. The Oversight Committee's demand for documents put the administration on notice that Congress was taking the corruption allegations seriously. In response, a group of Michigan Democrats even introduced the Michigan-Canada Partnership Act, legislation designed to stop any federal interference with the bridge's opening. They were trying to build a legislative firewall to protect the project from the whims of the White House. The whole episode exposed deep fractures. It showed a president willing to jeopardize a critical economic artery, possibly based on a single phone call with a billionaire donor's ally. It highlighted a stunning information failure in the White House, where policy could be dictated by social media posts completely detached from reality. But this story is about more than just one bridge. Zoom out, and you see several bigger, more troubling patterns. First, it's a wake-up call about how fragile our supply chains are. For decades, a quarter of U.S.-Canada trade has relied on a single, privately owned bridge. This shows how easily that link can be held hostage, not just by old infrastructure, but by politics and private interests. Second, this is a classic case of money's corrosive influence in politics. The Moran family's decades-long war against a public competitor is a textbook example of a private entity using its wealth to protect its monopoly at the public's expense. The fact that their lobbying could reach all the way to the president is a sobering reminder of how public policy can be bent to serve private greed. Third, this is a fundamental clash of how to govern. On one side, you have the approach of Mark Carney and the decades of public servants who worked on this project. A world of data, long-term planning, and fact-based decisions. On the other, you have a style driven by populist rhetoric and personal grievance, where complex issues are flattened into simplistic us versus them stories. The Gordie Howe Bridge became the physical collision point between these two worlds. Finally, the incident raises serious questions about the future of America's relationship with its closest allies. The U.S.-Canada partnership has long been a model of cooperation. This threat signals a shift towards a more adversarial and unpredictable relationship, sending a message that even long-standing agreements with trusted friends can be torn up on a whim. In the end, Trump's attempt to block the bridge didn't make him look strong. It made him look misinformed and easily manipulated. The facts were all there, publicly available, in a deal his own government had signed. But the facts didn't seem to matter. What mattered was the narrative, and in this case, that narrative appears to have come from a billionaire with a bridge to protect. The story of the Gordie Howe Bridge isn't over. The House Oversight Committee's investigation is ongoing, and its findings could have major repercussions. The bridge itself, a testament to engineering and perseverance, is slated to open soon, a silent rebuke to the chaos that surrounded its final days of construction. What we're left with is a stunning irony. A president who ran on an America First platform threatened to block a project that was an incredible deal for America, a multi-billion-dollar asset, co-owned by Michigan and fully financed by Canada. He tried to pick a fight with his closest ally, only to find out he was an unwitting soldier in a private corporate war. He demanded compensation for an investment his country never made, and ownership in a bridge his country already co-owned. Mark Carney's calm, decisive phone call didn't just diffuse a crisis, it exposed a deeper truth. It showed that in an era of rampant disinformation, simply stating the facts can be a radical act of power. It was a reminder that while rhetoric and rage may dominate the headlines, reality has a stubborn way of reasserting itself. The bridge was built with steel and concrete, but it was saved by facts. This whole episode leaves us with a lingering question. Should a single private family ever be allowed to control such a vital piece of international infrastructure? And what does it say about our political system when their interests can so easily be mistaken for the national interest? Let us know what you think in the comments below. If you found this investigation insightful, please hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that shape our world. And be sure to click the notification bell so you don't miss our next video. Thanks for watching.